We're going to start with Kris Cherewyk, who's an agronomist with Vaterstad Industries. He supports sales and marketing and product development departments from a crop performance standpoint. Here's Kris.
All right, thank you very much, Jay, and good morning, everybody. Hopefully, everyone is staying safe, depending on where you are with the storm. So, basically, what I'm going to be talking about today is making every plant count from an equipment perspective. And with the topics that we're going to be discussing, we could probably spend an hour or two on each of those topics. But since we have 10 minutes, we'll go through them briefly, and we'll try and articulate them as best we can. So, go next slide. So what we're going to talk about is 5 different topics relating to equipment. We're going to discuss seed to fertilizer placement, seed to soil contact, the evenness of plant spacing relating to proper seeding rate, seed depth consistency, and also soil warm-up. Next slide. So when we talk about seed to fertilizer placement, we're really wanting to emphasize 2 of the planks in the 4R nutrient placement, and that is the right place and the right rate. So when we talk about the right place, we want to have that fertilizer positioned where it's close, safe, and consistent fertilizer placement relative to the location of the seed. And so the agronomic benefits of that quick plant establishment are well known. Being able to get that crop out of the ground to better compete against weeds and better to compete against, of course, flea beetles as well too. So when we talk about placement, we really want to talk about return on investment, because if you have fertilizer that's not placed properly, we all know what the what the cost of fertilizer is these days. So bad fertilizer placement means that fertilizer is not going to be used, and so you want to get where that fertilizer is going to be taken up by the soil. And one thing that we want to emphasize, and we've heard a lot of conversation in the last number of years, is that to achieve the best yields, that we need to focus on more fertilizer. And so we really want to shift that conversation to, instead of having more and focusing on quantity, we really want to focus on quality, like where that fertilizer is placed in the soil to get that best return on investment and achieve that maximum yield. Next slide. So seed to soil contact is also a very important one that I don't think gets enough conversation. And when you're putting the seed into the soil, it has to be placed in good soil tilth to be able to access that moisture and that nutrients. If you place the seed in clumpy, blocky, and hard soil that with a lot of space around it, that nutrient and moisture access isn't going to happen, and that seed is, for lack of a better term, going to sit there. So when you have that good soil tilth sitting around the seed, then you have that quick nutrient and moisture access, and you also have that good root expansion that is required for that plant to be able to grow and get out of the soil quickly. One thing I'll touch on real quickly from an equipment perspective is the SeedHawk ISB knives do a really good job of this, that instead of shooting the seed straight down, it shoots the seed sideways into that undisturbed soil. So you have that good soil tilt that the seed gets into, but another benefit is also that seed doesn't have any seed bounce, because going back to where that seed is shooting straight down, it can bounce a little bit around in the seed trench. Whereas when you're shooting it into cushioned soil, it's almost like a baseball hitting or landing on a pillow instead of a piece of plywood. And so when you go into a field that's seeded with the SeedHawk ISB knives, you can really see that definition of seed row on the left side of the trench when you're looking where the drill has already gone. And so we've seen a lot of success with these knives, and it's been really popular with our growers. Next slide. So we're going to talk about evenness of plant spacing, and also how that relates to proper seeding rate as well too. So when you see the picture on the right side of your screen, in the background you see a crop that was seeded with a competitor drill, and in the foreground you see a crop that was seeded with the planter. And you'll notice the difference in plant spacing, just how much more consistent it is with that singulation. So Jay mentioned in an article back last week, talking about with our tempo planter, having seeding rates that need to be based on plants per square foot, not pounds per acre. And over the last number of years, especially, we have seen 1,000 kernel rates that have gone from anywhere from 3.8 grams to 7.1 grams. And so that is a tremendous difference when, say, if you have a seeding rate based on 4 pounds an acre, the amount of seeds that you're actually putting down can be very, very different. And so when you want to optimize that seeding rate and get that good plant spacing, whether it's with, especially with a drill, then that's when, just having that 1,000 kernel weight and determining that plants per square foot is extremely important. Next slide. So when we talk about the reasons for wanting to dial in this seeding rate, we look at what exactly canola is as a plant. It's obviously a very small seed related to corn, especially when you relate crops that are typically seeded with planters. Corn's a much bigger seed that where the ability to plant it with an even spacing in the soil is a lot simpler as opposed to the small seed that canola is. But canola grows from that very small seed into that big bushy plant with a lot of branches and a lot of root system, kind of like what corn is. Obviously, corn's a lot taller, but you get the idea of where just that evenness of plant spacing one by one helps you to build a better crop. Next slide. So when we have the evenness of plant spacing, what we're really trying to achieve is each plant coming out of the ground and being able to achieve its full potential. And that means eliminating what I like to call dud plants. Murray Hartman from Alberta Agriculture talked about a couple of years ago how plants that have a stem diameter of 1/4 inch or less produce little to no yields. And you see that in the fields when you go in, not only at that 2 to 4 leaf stage, but especially even during swathing or after harvest, where you have stems that are spaced very close together, and they're very spindly and really don't have any pods in them, if at all. Whereas plants that are spaced more evenly together, they're able to produce a robust plant with a lot of pods and actually give you something for yield. And this is especially important where we talked in a couple slides ago about that return on investment of fertilizer, where if you have these plants that are spaced close together, they're taking up that fertilizer and they're taking up that moisture, but they're not giving you anything for yields. So that return on investment with your fertilizer is greatly diminished. And especially with this last couple of years, we've seen with moisture levels being as low as they are, you really want to be able to utilize all that moisture to its full potential. And we'll talk a little bit about that coming up here. Next slide. So we talk about seeding depth. We want to make sure that each of those seeds is sitting at the same depth. And of course, when you go into, you have different terrain, but also in a field, you can have you have rocks, you have lumpy soil, you have residue. All of these things can affect seeding depth, whether it's with a drill or it's with a planter. So you really want to make sure that the depth stays consistent. And can we go to the next slide? And when we talk about evenness of depth, we also need to talk about the moisture depth in a field, because especially when we saw last year and the last few years, actually, that moisture depth across a field can vary greatly. And so if we look at, I don't think the picture really turned out as great as we hoped, but on the one side, you have a field that was planted with a competitor planter, and then the other side that was planted with a seed hawk. And if you look at the field in question, it was planted into a field with corn stems, and the field also featured some clumpy soil and rocks. So there was so the depth of consistency, or the seed depth consistency, wasn't as good as it should have been, just because of that variability in terrain. Whereas with the seed hawk drill, the row units were able to go a little bit more smoothly instead of bouncing around. And so then you really see a much more consistent evenness of emergence, as opposed to on the planter side, where some seeds were sitting in moisture, basically 1/4 of an inch at the surface. And when you have a year like this is pictures taken a couple of years ago, where it was so dry and there was no moisture at the top, then you're really going to see that variability in emergence. Next slide. So one of the last things I want to talk about is soil temperature. And I know we've obviously seen a lot of growers get into seeding a little bit earlier, but when you have that cooler soil, the cooler the soil, the longer that seed is going to sit in the soil and be subject to things like root diseases and such. And then also, the longer it takes to germinate, the more susceptible it's going to be to weed competition and canola. So we want to make sure that soil is going to be as warm as possible, and making sure that seed row is clear of residues. So using like the ISB knives and the Seed Hawk have done a really great job of going through that residue, and also the row cleaners on the Tempo have done a good job of making sure that that seed row is getting the start that it requires in terms of soil warm up. So that pretty much does it for my presentation. Now, next slide.